The air in the Seattle Public Library's grand reading room hung heavy with the scent of polished oak and the faint perfume of wealth. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light over the crowd of tailored suits and designer dresses gathered for the annual charity storytelling event. Children sat cross-legged on a colorful rug at the front, their eyes fixed on the guest author reading from a picture book about space adventures. The room buzzed with polite murmurs, but a sudden, clear voice sliced through the calm like a blade. "Miss Harper, will you tell a story with me?" Sophie Bennett, 12 years old, her thin frame anchored to a sleek wheelchair, leaned forward, her brown eyes sparkling with a defiance that startled the room. Her small hands gripped the armrests, knuckles pale against the black metal. The author paused mid-sentence, her smile faltering. Every head turned toward Sophie, then to Evelyn Harper, the library's only black staff member who stood quietly at the edge of the rug, holding a stack of books. Evelyn's heart skipped. She felt the weight of 100 stares, curious, judgmental, impatient. The children grinned, but the adults' faces tightened, their whispers sharp like static. Sophie's mother, Margaret Prescott, sat in the front row, her manicured fingers clutching a pearl clutch, her face a mask of mortification. Margaret, a pharmaceutical tycoon whose name adorned hospital wings, wasn't used to her daughter drawing attention, especially not like this. Sophie's condition, a rare neurological disorder that locked her legs in a maze of misfiring signals, had always been a private battle, one Margaret controlled with clinical precision. "Miss Bennett, this isn't the time," Charles Thornton, the library's manager, hissed from behind Evelyn, his voice low but cutting. His gray suit seemed to bristle with authority. "Keep the event moving." Evelyn's jaw tightened, but she set the books down, her movements deliberate. She'd seen that spark in Sophie's eyes before, in other kids who came to her after-school program, kids who'd been told their bodies limited their dreams. She stepped forward, her sneakers squeaking faintly on the polished floor, and knelt beside Sophie's wheelchair. "Sure, Sophie," Evelyn said, her voice warm, steady, like a campfire on a cold night. "What kind of story?" The girl's face lit up, and she launched into a tale of a space explorer, a girl who flew through galaxies on a wheelchair that glowed like a comet. Evelyn nodded, pulling a small tablet from her pocket. With a few taps, the library's augmented reality system hummed to life, projecting a shimmering 3D hologram above Sophie, a girl in a radiant wheelchair soaring past neon planets. The children gasped, clapping wildly, their voices a chorus of delight. The adults weren't as charmed. Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line, her eyes darting between Sophie and Evelyn. She felt the heat of embarrassment crawl up her neck, the same burn she'd felt years ago when her older sister Clara had collapsed on a school stage, her illness exposed to a cruel crowd. Margaret had sworn never to let Sophie face that kind of scrutiny. Yet here was her daughter, center stage, with a librarian who dared to indulge her. "That's enough," Margaret said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She stood, smoothing her silk dress, and wheeled Sophie back from the rug. The hologram flickered out. The children's cheers faded, replaced by awkward coughs and shifting chairs. Charles shot Evelyn a glare that promised a lecture later. "We're leaving," Margaret announced, her heels clicking toward the exit. Evelyn watched them go, her chest tight but her resolve unshaken. Sophie's laughter, brief and bright, echoed in her mind, a sound she'd heard too rarely in her years running Improv Dreams, her struggling nonprofit for kids like Sophie. As the room returned to its scripted rhythm, Evelyn picked up her books, her fingers brushing the tablet. She'd seen the cost of silencing a child's voice before, in her own childhood, when her limp had barred her from a school play. She wouldn't let that happen to Sophie, not if she could help it. Margaret, guiding Sophie's wheelchair through the library's glass doors, felt the girl's silence like a weight. Sophie's eyes, fixed on the floor, held a flicker of the joy from moments before. Margaret's throat tightened. She remembered Clara's eyes dimming before the end. She pushed the thought away, focusing on the cold evening air, but Sophie's small hand reached back, clutching hers, and for a moment, Margaret couldn't move. Evelyn Harper leaned against the counter of the library's break room, the hum of a flickering fluorescent light filling the silence. Her hands, still warm from clutching the tablet at yesterday's storytelling event, now wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug, the coffee inside long gone cold. The memory of Sophie Bennett's radiant smile lingered, a fleeting burst of light against the gray routine of her days. Evelyn's sneakers tapped softly on the linoleum floor, a nervous rhythm that echoed her thoughts. She'd seen that spark in kids before, kids who came to her Improv Dreams sessions, their eyes bright with stories no one else let them tell. But Sophie's joy, and the way it had unraveled under Margaret Prescott's sharp command, hit harder than most. Evelyn's past wasn't so different. At 10, she'd stood backstage at her school's talent show, her slight limp a remnant of a childhood injury hidden under a long skirt. She'd memorized every line of her monologue, only to hear the drama teacher say, "You'd be a distraction, Evie." The rejection had burned, a wound that fueled her late nights at the University of Washington, studying creative writing until her grandmother's illness pulled her back home. Now, at 32, she juggled 3 jobs, librarian, barista, online tutor, to keep Improv Dreams alive. The program, housed in a cramped community center, used augmented reality to let kids like Sophie build worlds where their disabilities didn't define them. But with rent due and grants drying up, the center's flickering projector might soon go dark. Across town, in a glass-walled penthouse overlooking Puget Sound, Margaret Prescott sat at a sleek marble table, her laptop open to a spreadsheet of Sophie's medical appointments. The Seattle skyline glittered outside, but her eyes were fixed on the numbers: costs for therapies, specialists, experimental drugs. Sophie's rare neurological disorder, a tangle of misfiring nerves that kept her legs unresponsive, was a puzzle Margaret had spent 12 years trying to solve. She'd built a pharmaceutical empire by controlling variables, but Sophie remained her greatest failure. The girls' laughter at the library, so vivid as she spun tales of a wheelchair-bound astronaut, had pierced Margaret's carefully constructed armor. It reminded her of Clara, her older sister, who danced through their childhood home despite her frail heart, only to collapse at 16, leaving Margaret with a vow to never lose control again. Sophie, curled up in her room down the hall, clutched a sketchbook. Her pencil traced the outline of a glowing wheelchair soaring past stars, a replica of the hologram Evelyn had conjured. The library's polished oak scents still clung to her memory, along with the warmth of Evelyn's voice, coaxing her story to life. Sophie's life was a parade of sterile clinics and grim-faced doctors, her mother's love a suffocating shield. She'd felt free for those few minutes, her imagination unbound, until Margaret's sharp voice had yanked her back. Sophie's fingers tightened on the pencil, the lead snapping under pressure. She wanted that freedom again, but her mother's shadow loomed too large. Evelyn, back at the library, slipped her tablet into her bag and headed to the community center. The Improv Dreams room was a patchwork of hope, walls covered in children's drawings, a second-hand projector humming faintly. She booted up the AR system, watching planets flicker to life in the dim space. The memory of Sophie's voice, bold and unapologetic, stirred something fierce in her. Evelyn had fought for this program because she knew what it meant to be silenced. She'd been that girl, limping but dreaming, and she'd be damned if she let another child's story go untold. Margaret, meanwhile, closed her laptop and stood, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. She glanced at Sophie's closed door, her hand hovering over the knob. The library event replayed in her mind, not the embarrassment, but Sophie's smile, unguarded and whole. For the first time in years, Margaret felt a crack in her resolve, a whisper of doubt about the life she'd built around her daughter.
She turned away, the weight of Clara's memory pressing against her chest, and picked up her phone to schedule another therapy session. Control was all she knew, but Sophie's sketchbook, left open on the couch, told a different story, one Margaret wasn't ready to read.
The elevator to the 42nd floor of Prescott Pharmaceuticals hummed with sterile precision, its mirrored walls reflecting Evelyn Harper's tense posture. She adjusted her navy blazer, borrowed from a friend to look professional, but the faint coffee stain on her sleeve betrayed her. Her sneakers squeaked against the polished floor, a stark contrast to the click of heels that echoed through Margaret's world. Evelyn clutched her tablet, the same one that had brought Sophie's astronaut story to life at the library 2 days ago. That moment, Sophie's laughter, the shimmering hologram, had felt like a victory. Now, summoned to Margaret's office, it felt like a trap. Margaret sat behind a glass desk, her auburn hair pulled into a severe bun, her gray suit sharp as a blade. The Seattle skyline sprawled beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, a kingdom she'd conquered through grit and calculation. Her eyes, cold as the steel in her voice, fixed on Evelyn. "Miss Harper," she began, "your stunt at the library was unacceptable." The word stunt landed like a slap. Evelyn's fingers tightened around the tablet, her pulse quickening. She'd expected a reprimand, but the venom in Margaret's tone was personal, as if Sophie's fleeting joy had been a direct affront. "It wasn't a stunt," Evelyn said, her voice steady despite the heat rising in her chest. "Sophie wanted to tell a story. I helped her." She thought of her own childhood, the sting of being called a distraction, her dreams dismissed because of a limp. She wouldn't let Margaret rewrite Sophie's moment into something shameful. "Your program, Improv Dreams, uses that augmented reality nonsense," Margaret snapped, waving a hand as if swatting a fly. "It's reckless, encouraging a child like Sophie to act out in public." Evelyn took a breath, the air thick with the scent of Margaret's jasmine perfume. "AR lets kids like Sophie see themselves as heroes, not patients," she said. "It's not about acting out, it's about giving them a voice." Margaret leaned forward, her knuckles white against the desk. "You don't know my daughter. Sophie needs structure, not fantasies." Her voice cracked, betraying a flicker of fear. Evelyn caught it, a glimpse of the woman behind the empire, haunted by something deeper. Perhaps the shadow of Clara, the sister Margaret never spoke of, but carried like a weight. "I'm offering you a job," Margaret continued, her tone shifting to cold pragmatism. "Work for me, privately, with Sophie. 5 times your current salary." The offer hung in the air, tempting, but Evelyn's jaw tightened. She saw the catch, a gilded cage, trading Sophie's freedom for a paycheck. "No," Evelyn said, her voice firm. "Sophie needs a community, not a hired babysitter. Improv Dreams gives her that, a place to be herself, not your project." Margaret's eyes narrowed, her fingers tapping the desk like a metronome. "You're refusing me?" she asked, incredulous, as if the word no was foreign in her world. Evelyn stood taller, her sneakers grounding her. "I'm refusing to let Sophie be silenced. She deserves to tell her own stories." The room fell silent, the hum of the air conditioner amplifying the tension. Margaret's face flushed, her control slipping. She remembered Clara's final performance, collapsing under the spotlight, the crowd's whispers branding her family as fragile. She wouldn't let Sophie be exposed like that, not by some librarian with a tablet and a dream. "Get out," Margaret said, her voice low, lethal. Evelyn nodded, her heart pounding but her resolve unbroken. She thought of Sophie's sketchbook, the astronaut drawing that had captured a girl unbound by limitations. As she stepped into the elevator, the doors closing with a soft ding, Evelyn felt the weight of her own past, those moments she'd been told she wasn't enough. She wouldn't let Sophie carry that burden. Margaret remained at her desk, staring at the skyline, her hands trembling. Sophie's laughter from the library echoed in her mind, clashing with the memory of Clara's frail body on a hospital bed. She'd built walls to protect Sophie, but Evelyn's words had cracked them. Margaret picked up her phone, dialing Sophie's latest therapist, her fingers moving on instinct. Control was her armor, but for the first time, she wondered if it was suffocating the one person she meant to save. The sterile hum of the rehabilitation clinic filled the air, a cold counterpoint to the Seattle rain drumming against the windows. Sophie Bennett sat in her wheelchair, her small hands folded tightly in her lap, her brown eyes dulled by the fluorescent lights overhead. The therapist, a young woman in crisp scrubs, adjusted a sensor on Sophie's leg, her movements mechanical. "Try to lift, Sophie," she said, her voice clipped with professional detachment. Sophie's jaw clenched, her legs unresponsive despite the high-tech equipment strapped to them. Margaret Prescott stood by the door, her arms crossed, her tailored coat damp from the dash through the parking lot. Her eyes darted between Sophie and the therapist, searching for progress that never came. "Again," the therapist urged, but Sophie's shoulders slumped, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I can't," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the beep of the machines. Margaret's chest tightened, the sound slicing through her like a blade. She'd poured millions into this clinic, hand-picked the best specialists, yet Sophie's disorder, a labyrinth of misfiring nerves, remained unyielding. The memory of Sophie's laughter at the library, her face alight as she spun tales of a wheelchair-bound astronaut, felt like a taunt now. That fleeting joy, sparked by Evelyn Harper's reckless encouragement, had no place in the controlled world Margaret had built. "Enough for today," Margaret said sharply, stepping forward. The therapist nodded, packing up her tools with practiced efficiency. Sophie's gaze dropped to the floor, her fingers twisting the hem of her sweater. Margaret wheeled her daughter out, the clinic's antiseptic scent clinging to them like regret. In the car, the silence was heavy, broken only by the rhythmic swish of windshield wipers. Margaret gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white, her mind replaying Evelyn's words from their meeting. Sophie deserves to tell her own stories. The defiance in Evelyn's voice had stung, but Sophie's tearful face now hurt worse. That evening, at a glittering corporate gala in a downtown hotel, Margaret stood among colleagues, her champagne flute untouched. The ballroom sparkled with chandeliers, the air thick with the clink of glasses and the murmur of power plays. A board member, his tie loosened, leaned in. "Heard about your daughter's little performance at the library," he said, his smirk barely concealed. "Quite the spectacle." Margaret's smile froze, her pulse spiking. The library event, Sophie's bold interruption, the glowing hologram, had become gossip, a crack in her polished reputation. She excused herself, her heels clicking furiously across the marble floor, and slipped into a quiet corridor. Alone, Margaret's composure cracked. She saw Clara's face, her sister's frail body collapsing on a school stage, the crowd's whispers branding their family as weak. She'd vowed Sophie would never face that scrutiny, yet Evelyn's program had thrust her daughter into the spotlight. Margaret's phone buzzed, a text from her assistant about another therapy appointment. She ignored it, her eyes catching on a photo Sophie had left on the car's passenger seat, a sketch of a girl in a glowing wheelchair, soaring past stars. The drawing, vibrant with crayon streaks, was a relic of that library moment, a reminder of Sophie's unguarded smile. Back at home, Margaret tucked Sophie into bed, the girl's room a fortress of medical charts and monitors. Sophie clutched her sketchbook, her voice small. "I like telling stories with Miss Harper," she said, her eyes avoiding Margaret's. It felt real. Margaret's throat tightened, the words hitting like a stone. She kissed Sophie's forehead, the gesture mechanical, and turned off the light. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall, the sketchbook's image burning in her mind. Clara had loved to dance, despite her illness, until the world judged her. Margaret had spent years shielding Sophie from that judgment, but now, seeing her daughter's dim spirit, she felt the walls she'd built trembling. Evelyn's refusal to be bought, her insistence on Sophie's freedom, echoed in the silence. Margaret straightened, her resolve hardening. She'd double down on the therapies, keep Sophie safe. But as she glanced back at Sophie's closed door, the astronaut sketch lingered, a quiet challenge to everything she thought she knew.
The community center smelled of old paint and fresh coffee, its walls a riot of children's drawings, spaceships, dragons, and scribbled dreams. Evelyn Harper adjusted the AR projector, its hum filling the cramped room as planets flickered to life in a glowing 3D swirl above the scratched wooden floor. She glanced at the door, her pulse quickening. It had been a week since her clash with Margaret Prescott, since she'd refused to let Sophie Bennett's spark be caged. Now, against all odds, Margaret had agreed to bring Sophie to Improv Dreams. Just once, she said, her voice clipped over the phone. Evelyn smoothed her faded sweater, the memory of Sophie's astronaut sketch fueling her resolve. The door creaked open, and Sophie rolled in, her wheelchair catching the late afternoon light. Her brown eyes widened at the holographic stars, a smile breaking through her usual guarded expression. Margaret followed, her tailored coat out of place among the second-hand chairs, her face a mask of skepticism. Evelyn met her gaze, nodding politely, but the air crackled with unspoken tension. The library event, Sophie's bold story, Margaret's icy dismissal in that glass office, still hung between them. "Welcome, Sophie," Evelyn said, kneeling beside the girl. "Ready to build a world?" Sophie nodded, her fingers twitching with excitement, clutching the same sketchbook that held her glowing wheelchair drawing.
Evelyn guided Sophie to the center of the room, where a dozen kids, some in wheelchairs, others with braces or canes, formed a loose circle. The AR system cast a nebula around them, its colors shifting with their voices. "We're explorers today," Evelyn said, her voice warm, inviting. "Sophie, what's our mission?" Sophie hesitated, glancing at Margaret, who stood stiffly by the wall, arms crossed. Then, emboldened, she spoke. "We're finding a lost planet where everyone can fly." The kids cheered, their voices layering into a story of rogue comets and brave pilots. Sophie led, her words painting a girl in a wheelchair who steered a starship. The hologram morphed, reflecting her vision, a radiant ship soaring through a cosmic storm. Margaret watched, her heels rooted to the floor, the scene jarring against her memories of sterile clinics and Sophie's tearful refusals. She'd spent years shielding her daughter, haunted by Clara's collapse under a spotlight, the crowd's judgment searing their family. Yet here, Sophie was different, her shoulders relaxed, her voice steady, her eyes alight with a confidence Margaret hadn't seen since before the diagnosis. The room's energy, chaotic but alive, clashed with the controlled world she'd built. Evelyn moved among the kids, adjusting the projector, her calm presence anchoring the group. Margaret's fingers tightened around her purse, Evelyn's words from their meeting echoing. Sophie deserves to tell her own stories. A man in a worn jacket lingered near the door, scribbling in a notebook. A local reporter, Evelyn had mentioned, here to cover community programs. Margaret's stomach twisted, her instinct to pull Sophie away flaring. Publicity meant exposure, vulnerability, the kind of scrutiny that had broken her family before. But Sophie's laughter, bright and unguarded, cut through her fear. The girl wheeled forward, directing the group to add a friendly alien to their story, the hologram blooming with green tentacles. The other kids leaned in, their faces glowing with the same joy Margaret had glimpsed at the library when Sophie's astronaut had soared. As the session ended, Evelyn handed Sophie a small AR chip, a keepsake of their story. "You're a natural," she said, her smile genuine. Sophie beamed, clutching the chip like a treasure. Margaret approached, her voice low. "This doesn't change anything," she said, but her eyes betrayed doubt, lingering on Sophie's sketchbook, now open to a new drawing of their starship. Evelyn nodded, unfazed, her own past, the rejection of her childhood dreams, steadying her. "It's a start," she said, turning to clean up. Margaret wheeled Sophie out, the community center's warmth fading into the chill of the parking lot. Sophie's chatter about the alien filled the air, but Margaret's mind was elsewhere, replaying the library's hologram, the clinic's failures, Clara's dimming eyes. For the first time, she wondered if her need to protect Sophie was dimming her daughter's light.
She glanced at the AR chip in Sophie's hand, its faint glow a quiet challenge, and felt the ground beneath her control shift.
The community center buzzed with chaotic energy, the air thick with the hum of the AR projector and the laughter of children weaving tales of interstellar adventures. Planets and starships swirled in holographic splendor above the worn wooden floor, casting a kaleidoscope of colors across Sophie Bennett's face. The 12-year-old, her wheelchair a steady anchor, led her group with a confidence that seemed to defy the limitations of her trembling legs. "Our captain outsmarts the meteor storm," she declared, her voice cutting through the chatter, prompting a chorus of cheers from the other kids. Evelyn Harper adjusted the projector settings, her fingers deft, her eyes bright with pride. Sophie's sketchbook, open to a vibrant starship drawing, lay beside her, a testament to the spark first ignited at the library. Margaret Prescott stood at the edge of the room, her tailored coat a stark contrast to the center's faded walls, her arms crossed tightly. The sight of Sophie, so alive, so unbound, stirred a warmth she hadn't felt since Clara's carefree dances in their childhood living room. But it also churned a familiar fear, the memory of Clara's collapse under a school spotlight, the crowd's whispers branding their family as fragile. Margaret's nails dug into her palms, the Improv Dreams session a reckless gamble in her tightly controlled world. Evelyn's calm presence, guiding the kids without dictating, grated against her need for order, echoing their tense exchange in her office days ago. Sophie's voice rose, directing her group to add a rogue comment to their story. The hologram shifted, a fiery streak blazing across the virtual sky, and the kids gasped, their faces glowing with wonder. Evelyn knelt beside Sophie, whispering encouragement, her faded sweater brushing against the wheelchair's armrest. "You're leading this ship, Captain," she said, her smile a quiet echo of the defiance she'd shown Margaret. For a moment, Margaret saw not just her daughter, but a girl who didn't need fixing, a girl who was whole. The realization hit like a cold wave, clashing with the sterile clinics and failed therapies that defined their lives. A sharp click broke her reverie. The reporter from the last session, his worn jacket now paired with a camera, snapped photos from the doorway. His lens zeroed in on Sophie, then Margaret, his notebook already thick with notes. Margaret's stomach lurched, her pulse spiking. She knew that look, opportunistic, ready to spin a story. "Prescott heiress in a community stunt," she imagined the headline, her reputation as a controlled, untouchable mogul unraveling. She stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply, and hissed at Evelyn, "Did you invite him? Is this your plan to shame me?" The room quieted, the kids' laughter fading, Sophie's eyes flicking nervously to her mother. Evelyn stood, her sneakers squeaking, her voice low but firm. "I didn't call anyone. He's here for the community programs." Her gaze held Margaret's, unyielding, the same fire from their office confrontation. "This isn't about you. It's about them." She gestured to the kids, their holograms still flickering. Margaret's face flushed, the memory of Clara's public collapse merging with the fear of Sophie's exposure. "You're reckless," she snapped. "Sophie's not your experiment." She wheeled Sophie away from the group, the girl's hands clutching the AR chip from last week, her starship sketch left behind on the floor. The other kids watched, their stories pausing, the hologram dimming without Sophie's voice. Evelyn picked up the sketchbook, her fingers tracing the vibrant lines, her own childhood rejection, a teacher's dismissal of her limp, burning in her chest. She wouldn't let Sophie's light be snuffed out. Margaret, guiding Sophie through the center's creaky doors, felt the weight of her daughter's silence. The rain outside mirrored her turmoil, each drop a reminder of the library's glowing astronaut, the clinic's failures, Clara's fading smile. She'd pulled Sophie out to protect her, but as Sophie's hand slipped from hers, clutching the AR chip, Margaret felt the ground shift again. Her control, once ironclad, was cracking, and the reporter's camera flash, catching them in the parking lot, burned like a spotlight she couldn't escape. The rain-soaked parking lot outside the community center glistened under Seattle's gray sky, the patter of drops on Margaret Prescott's umbrella a relentless drumbeat.
Sophie Bennett sat in her wheelchair beside the car, her small hands clutching the AR chip from Improv Dreams, her eyes fixed on the wet asphalt. The camera flash from the reporter, still lingering near the center's door, had burned into Margaret's vision. A stark reminder of the library event, Sophie's radiant story, the crowd's whispers, her own desperate need to shield her daughter from scrutiny. She'd pulled Sophie out of the session, convinced Evelyn Harper's reckless encouragement would expose her daughter to the same judgment that had crushed Clara, her sister, years ago. But Sophie's silence now, heavier than the rain, cut deeper than any headline. "Sophie, get in," Margaret said, her voice sharp but trembling, her tailored coat damp at the edges. Sophie didn't move, her fingers tightening around the chip, its faint glow pulsing like a heartbeat. "Mom," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain, "Improv Dreams is the only place I don't feel broken." The words hit Margaret like a fist, cracking the armor she'd built since Clara's collapse on that school stage, the crowd's pity branding their family. She saw Clara's frail smile, dimming in a hospital bed, and Sophie's face now, defiant yet fragile, pleading for something Margaret hadn't given, freedom to be herself. Margaret's knees buckled, her umbrella tilting, letting rain streak her face. She thought of the clinics, the sterile machines, Sophie's tears when therapies failed. She thought of Evelyn's words in her office. Sophie deserves to tell her own stories. And the astronaut sketch, vibrant with a joy Margaret couldn't manufacture. Her fear of losing Sophie, rooted in Clara's loss, had built a cage, not a shield. "I'm sorry," Margaret said, her voice breaking, the first apology she'd ever offered her daughter. Sophie's eyes widened, meeting hers, and for a moment the rain seemed to pause. Evelyn appeared at the center's door, her faded sweater soaked, Sophie's sketchbook tucked under her arm. She'd seen the reporter's flash, felt the sting of Margaret's accusation, but Sophie's words stopped her. She stepped closer, rain dripping from her curls, her own past, the rejection of her childhood dreams for a limb, fueling her resolve. "Sophie, you want to finish your story?" Evelyn asked, her voice soft but steady. Sophie nodded, her fingers loosening on the AR chip. Margaret hesitated, her instinct to control warring with the crack in her heart. Then, slowly, she pushed Sophie's wheelchair back toward the center, the wheels splashing through puddles. Inside, the room hummed with the AR projector's glow, planets still flickering from the interrupted session. The other kids, sensing the shift, gathered around Sophie, their voices eager. Evelyn handed Sophie the sketchbook, opened to the starship drawing, and restarted the AR system. Sophie took a breath, her voice stronger now. "Our captain finds the lost planet," she said, the hologram blooming with a vibrant world of floating islands. Margaret stood back, her coat dripping, watching Sophie lead, her daughter's confidence a mirror to Clara's courage before the end.
The reporter, now inside, lowered his camera, his notebook forgotten, as he watched the kid's story unfold. Evelyn glanced at him, then at Margaret, a silent understanding passing between them. Margaret stepped forward, her voice unsteady. "Sophie, can I join?" The room stilled, the kids' eyes wide. Sophie grinned, handing her mother an AR controller. "You're the alien ambassador," she said, and the hologram shifted, casting Margaret as a glowing figure in their cosmic tale. The kids laughed, the sound filling the room, and Margaret, for the first time, let go, her movements clumsy but real, her laughter mingling with Sophie's. The reporter's camera clicked again, but this time Margaret didn't flinch. The video he'd capture, mother and daughter weaving a story together, would spread online, a beacon of connection, not shame. As the hologram glowed, Evelyn saw her own younger self, limping but dreaming, reflected in Sophie's joy. Margaret, drenched and unguarded, felt Clara's memory soften, no longer a wound, but a guide, urging her to let Sophie shine. The community center's walls, once a patchwork of peeling paint and children's drawings, now stood half demolished, the air thick with the scent of sawdust and fresh concrete. Evelyn Harper walked through the construction site, her sneakers crunching over gravel, a blueprint tucked under her arm. The skeleton of the new Improv Dreams Center rose around her, its steel beams catching the Seattle sunrise. Months had passed since the rainy night when Sophie Bennett's plea, "I don't feel broken," had cracked Margaret Prescott's resolve, and the viral video of mother and daughter weaving a holographic story had spread like wildfire. That moment, born from Sophie's starship sketches and Evelyn's stubborn belief, had changed everything. Evelyn paused by a stack of drywall, her fingers brushing the AR chip she now carried in her pocket, a keepsake from Sophie's first session. The memory of the library, Sophie's bold interruption, the glowing astronaut, felt distant, yet it pulsed in every decision since. Margaret's transformation in the rain-soaked parking lot, her hesitant step into Sophie's story, had been the turning point. The video, shared across social media, had drawn donors, volunteers, and attention to Improv Dreams. Margaret, once a towering figure of control, had called a press conference the next day, her voice steady but raw. "The Prescott Foundation will fund a new Improv Dreams Center," she announced, cameras flashing. "Evelyn Harper will lead it, with full autonomy." Now, Evelyn watched workers hoist a glass panel, the future center's walls designed to reflect Sophie's vision. Open, vibrant, with AR screens for kids to build their worlds. Sophie rolled up beside her, her wheelchair navigating the uneven ground with practiced ease. Her sketchbook open to a new drawing, a city of floating platforms, each glowing with holographic stories. "Can we add a space for aliens?" Sophie asked, her brown eyes bright, no longer dulled by clinic visits. Evelyn grinned, kneeling to meet her gaze. "Aliens get a whole wing," she said, tapping the blueprint. Sophie laughed, the sound echoing through the site, a reminder of the girl who dared to speak at the library. Margaret approached, her heels traded for practical flats, her face softer than the severe bun and tailored coat of months past. She carried a tablet, its screen displaying design mock-ups shaped by Sophie's ideas and input from other kids. "This is ambitious," Margaret said, her voice tinged with awe. Evelyn nodded, sensing the shift in her, less a mogul, more a mother learning to listen. The memory of Clara, Margaret's sister, no longer a specter of fear, but a quiet guide, had pushed her to this moment. "It's what they deserve," Evelyn said, her own past, the rejection of her childhood dreams for a limp, fueling her words. "A place to be seen, not fixed." The reporter from that pivotal night, now a regular at Improv Dreams, lingered nearby, his camera capturing the construction. His article, published after the viral video, had praised the program's innovation, turning Margaret's fear of exposure into a beacon of hope. She no longer flinched at his lens, her focus on Sophie, who wheeled ahead, pointing out where the AR projectors would go. "She's designing this as much as we are," Margaret said, a smile breaking through. Evelyn saw the crack in her armor, the same one she'd glimpsed when Margaret joined Sophie's story, laughing under the hologram's glow. As the sun climbed higher, Evelyn and Margaret stood side by side, watching Sophie sketch with a group of kids who joined the planning. The community center's old walls, once a refuge for Evelyn's struggling program, were giving way to something larger, a testament to a girl's courage, a mother's surrender, and a librarian's refusal to back down. The AR chip in Evelyn's pocket felt warm, a reminder of the library's spark, the office clash, the rainy reckoning. Margaret touched Sophie's shoulder, her hands steady, no longer clutching for control. The construction noise faded, replaced by the hum of possibility, as the new center promised a space where every child's story could soar, unbound by the limits others imposed. The new Improv Dreams Center gleamed under the Seattle sun, its glass walls reflecting a sky streaked with morning clouds. The air buzzed with the chatter of families, the squeak of wheelchairs, and the hum of AR projectors casting holographic galaxies across the atrium. Evelyn Harper stood at the entrance, her sneakers swapped for polished boots, a ribbon-cutting scissors in her hand. The scent of fresh paint mingled with the warmth of coffee from a nearby table where volunteers welcomed hundreds of children and parents to the grand opening. A year ago, Evelyn had been a librarian scraping by, her program clinging to life in a crumbling community center. Now she's its director, her vision, sparked by a girl's bold story in a library, made real. Sophie Bennett wheeled through the crowd, her sketchbook tucked under her arm, its pages filled with starships and floating cities. At 13, her brown eyes carried a confidence that had grown since that rainy night when her words, "I don't feel broken," had shattered Margaret Prescott's walls. Sophie paused by an AR station where kids were building a holographic jungle. She tapped a tablet, adding a winged creature, her laughter blending with theirs. Evelyn watched, her fingers brushing the AR chip in her pocket, a relic of Sophie's first session when a wheelchair-bound astronaut had lit up a library. That moment, and the viral video of Sophie and Margaret weaving a story together, had brought them here. Margaret stood nearby, her tailored coat replaced by a soft sweater, her auburn hair loose around her shoulders. She no longer loomed like the pharmaceutical titan who'd once demanded control in a glass-walled office. The memory of Clara, her sister lost to illness, had softened from a wound into a quiet strength, guiding her to let Sophie lead. Margaret joined her daughter at the AR station, her fingers hesitant but curious as she added a glowing tree to the jungle. "Nice touch, Mom," Sophie said, grinning, and Margaret's laugh, unguarded, echoed through the atrium. The sound felt like a release, a far cry from the sterile clinics and failed therapies that had once defined their lives.